The closing blessing of the Shemona Esrei is Sim Shalom. We ask God to place or put peace, Tova. When we ask for peace, we're not only asking for peace. In addition, Tova, goodness, bracha, blessing, Chen, which we discussed, charm, Chesed. He should avail us with indiscriminate kindness, V'rachmim, mercy, Aleinu, upon us, I'll call Yisrael Amecha, and all Israel your people. We discussed all that. Bless us, our Father. We, as one, we discussed this concept, why one? With the illumination of your countenance. Because with the light of your countenance, you've given us, God, our Almighty, Torah Chaim, the Torah of life, and the ability to love kindness, Avas Chesed. I'd just like to discuss that point. Torah Chaim, Avas Chesed. At Sinai, God gave us the living Torah. What does it mean, the living Torah? What infusion to the soul is the most impactful and gives us relevance to eternity and to be able to cleave to God at the most advanced level? That's the Torah itself. The Torah itself is the medium through which we're able to attach ourselves to the infinite system. I mentioned in the past, there's a Zohar. The Zohar says, Yisrael v'orais v'kutshu brichu. The Jewish people and the illuminator, which is the Torah, the Kutsha Baruch and God himself are one. We're intermingled, we're intermeshed with one another. The Torah is the catalyst through which we attach to God. So at Sinai, what did God give us? With the illumination of his countenance, what did he give us? Torah Chaim. The Torah, which is the source for our life, it's the source for our eternity. I'd mentioned him at Maral of Prague, where Moshe Rabbeinu says to the Jewish people, you cleave to God, you live continuously. So he explains, what is the source of all life? The source of all life is God himself. So if you cleave and attach yourself to that source, you're alive and you're functional and you're thriving. So the key is to connect to the source. God is the source of everything. If you go and you cleave to God, you're Almighty, you're living continuously. What happened at Sinai? God chose us because we at Sinai, we accepted the Torah unequivocally. God allowed us to be exposed to the light of his countenance. And through that, he gave us Torah Chaim, the Torah which allows us to be fully functional, alive at the most advanced level. That's because through that is the attachment. Through that, we connect to the eternal source, which is God himself. V'avas Chesed. The Chofetz Chaim writes, he has to work loving kindness. He says, you have two people. You have one person who gives charity, but he's not a philanthropist, because it's case by case. If he feels that it touches his fancy, he supports it. A person who's a philanthropist is a person, he wants to do philanthropy, he just has to find the right thing. He has a love to help. That's called a Bal Chesed. There are two people. There's an Osa Chesed, this does kindness, and there's a person who actually he possesses that. It's a trait, it's a characteristic which he possesses. And because he possesses that characteristic, as long he's always subconsciously or consciously always looking for those opportunities where he's able to express that innate characteristic which he possesses is the loving kindness only to express and to actualize it in that particular situation. At Sinai, through the illumination of God's countenance, he gave us Torah's Chaim. Now, we explained at length that the face always reveals the inner part. The word panim is face. Panim means the internal part of the person. If you're able to read a person's face, you're able to read the essence, the total makeup of the person. So if God allowed us to be exposed to the illumination of his face, that means we became privy to what is eternal. If the face reveals the essence of the makeup of whatever that person is or that being is, so when God allowed us to see the illumination of his face, what did he expose us to? What did we become privy to? We became privy to eternity. Not that we're able to fathom what eternity is, but we were exposed to eternity. That's the light of his countenance. So when we're exposed to the light of his countenance, what is that? That is the Torah itself, because the Torah itself is the wisdom of God, which connects us to eternity. Not that we understand the depth and the breadth, because it's something which is endless. It's something which is not fathomable. You cannot encompass the totality of Torah, as we explained. We have the 5 Chumashim, 5 volumes of the Torah. Then we have the oral law. And there are endless levels of understanding of that oral law. But even Rabbi Akiva, even Moshe Rabbeinu, as great as they were, everybody is finite. If you're finite cannot encompass something which is infinite. So whatever we study, when you say the verse, Bereshis bara Elokim es hashamayim v'ha'aretz, in the beginning God created heaven and earth, and you say those words, within those words are contained eternity, something which is infinite. Although we cannot grasp infinite, so therefore we read in Pirkei Avos, in Torah, as much as you delve the Torah, everything is contained in the Torah. Everything in existence is contained in the Torah, because the Torah itself is the blueprint for existence. So God allowed us to be privy to the light of his countenance, and the countenance represents infinite, and he allowed us to be exposed to that light. But what did we attain through that? Torah's Chaim. The Torah, which is the source of our life. Life doesn't mean something which is temporary, something which is limited, something which is eternity. It's Torah's Chaim. That Torah connects us to the ultimate level of life, because that's the connection to him. Vavas Chesed. God himself, why did he create the world? He had no reason to create the world other than doing good. That there should be people who are beneficiaries of his goodness. That's Chesed. And that's what David says in Tehillim, Olam Chesed Yiboneh. The impetus to create existence was Chesed. So when we were exposed to the light of his countenance, and through that we received the Torah, which is the source of our eternity, which is this basis for our life, our continuation forever, because we attached to the source, which is infinite. Identically, we attach to understand, to be endowed with the love for kindness. It's Avas Chesed. Now, the Ramchal himself writes that, he speaks about how does the conversion process. A person is born a non-Jew. His soul is not a Jewish soul. And there's a difference between a Jewish soul and a non-Jewish soul. But if he follows the prescription and the protocols to convert, he becomes part of the Jewish people. He's not one of the 12 tribes. He's not a descendant of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He doesn't have the pedigree. So if that's the case, how does he become a Jew? I'm not talking about it's hocus pocus. It's none of that. So he explains, this is the way he explains it. He says, if you take a branch and you graft it onto a tree and you follow the procedure how to make the graft to be perfect, over time, what happens? The ecosystem of the tree expresses itself in that branch, because now the branch has become part of the ecosystem of the tree. When we do mitzvahs, we do many things. We may be finite, because the only thing which is infinite is God himself. But what about if we do the mitzvahs in a way where God says, if you follow my prescription of life, the Torah, study my wisdom, which gives you a connection to eternity, what happens is you become grafted onto my essence. So although we're finite, but when we attach ourselves to his essence, we become part of an infinite system, because we're nourished through something which is infinite, which is God himself. That's the Ramchal. So just as the convert, when they attach to the Jewish people, following the laws of conversion, whatever the laws of conversion are, the acceptance of the laws, committed, believing in certain things, and undergoing procedures, you attach yourself to the Jewish people. When you attach yourself to the Jewish people, you graft it onto their spiritual system, into their spiritual ecosystem. And the Jewish people themselves are attached to God's ecosystem. God's ecosystem is infinite. So as a result of attaching to him, our system becomes part of an infinite system. And this is why at Sinai, when God allowed us to be privy to the light of his face, we're exposed to infinite. That attachment allowed us to have relevance to eternal life. Just as God is eternal, but he's more than eternal, he's infinite, we became eternal and we have relevance to the infinite. And simultaneously, we were endowed with Avas Chesed, because through that, just as God himself is Chesed, as he created the world, which was purely indiscriminate kindness, he had no impetus to do it, identically, becoming part of him, we have Avas Chesed. That was the endowment which we were given at Sinai. It's not something we do Chesed, but we're endowed with Chesed. Now, it's very interesting. I've mentioned many times, the Talmud tells us that there's certain characteristics which are unique to every Jew. Being compassionate, Jews are naturally compassionate. Jews have shame, have conscience, and Jews naturally do acts of loving kindness. It's natural to the Jew. Per capita, there's no people in the world that are as philanthropic, giving as the Jewish people. They may not support the right causes, but naturally, it's a natural with the Jew. It's something inborn in us. Why is it so inborn in us? So the reason is because since we come from the holy patriarchs, and they themselves develop these characteristics within themselves, our spiritual gene pool is their genealogy. Therefore, within our genes lies to be naturally compassionate, to be naturally shameful, and to do acts of loving kindness. But because they had relevance to that pre-Sinai, and they came to this on their own, when we came to Sinai, because they had that commonality with God, therefore, when we were all exposed to his illumination, to be privy to that, we assumed his loving kindness. We have a semblance of his loving kindness. Just as all creation was brought into being, and the Jew being brought into being, giving the opportunity to be part of eternity, every Jew has naturally that characteristic, because we attach to that system, which is God himself, so we assume that characteristic of loving kindness for that reason. That was the process, exactly how it happened. The Talmud tells us that every soul that would eventually be born into existence was at Sinai. That means, although our physicality was not there, it was only the Jews that were present at the time, but any future soul that was going to come into existence was at Sinai, to be exposed to that, the illumination of God's countenance. Because that was so impactful, that made a difference to what degree we were able to advance. We were given that Torah's Chaim. We were given that level of connection that when we study Torah, we become part of eternity. When we come into existence, we have a natural inclination. We're inclined to do acts of loving kindness. Therefore, even though it doesn't exist, we seek it out. There's a story, the Chofetz Chaim was known as a living angel. He's a very holy man. And there's a famous story, a question which Rav Aaron Kotler asked the Brisker Rov, that the Chofetz Chaim, if you study his works, his writings, it was clear he was the leading Torah sage of the Jewish people when in his era, in his time. He wrote a commentary on Orach Chaim, which is the laws which pertain daily holidays, the Shabbos. And you see for his level of knowledge and clarity, and it's one of a kind of a work. And he wrote on other things, and yet the Chofetz Chaim is not known as a great Torah sage. He's not renowned for that. What he's renowned for is being a great chassid. He was scrupulously pious, devout at a special level. That's what he's known for. So Rav Aaron Kotler, Zecher Tzaddik Livrocha, asked the Brisker Rov, why is the Chofetz Chaim known as the great chassid? The person was devoutly pious at a level of holiness, but he's not known as a Torah sage, although we study his works. And we see anybody who knows and has any level of understanding of what breadth and depth of Torah knowledge is, and sees what it is. But yet, we're not touched by it. Why? So Brisker Rov explained to Reb Chaim, to Reb Aaron Kotler, there's a principle in the Talmud, Tzaddik goes v'HaKadosh Baruch Hu Chaim, that if a tzaddik decrees something, God is bound to the decree of the tzaddik. The Chofetz Chaim was a very humble man. He did not want to be acknowledged or recognized as a leading Torah sage. So he prayed to God that he should not be recognized as such. Now, knowledge is a reality, is a fact. I know what I know what I don't know. Chofetz Chaim knew the breadth and depth of his knowledge. Very few people had that. So that was a reality. So he prayed to God, God, please, I don't want to be acknowledged for my greatness in Torah. That was his humility. But what about in the area of devout piety? The more devout you are, the more you recognize where you're not at. So to say, I want to be recognized, not to be recognized for my devout piety, that's arrogance. That he always sees himself way behind the eight ball because he sees where he's not. The person who's that exceptional tzaddik sees he's not where he should be. He always sees there's so much more to accomplish. Therefore, that's not a request he ever made of God, that I should not be recognized as a chassid. So because he never made that request, therefore that's the reason why the Chofetz Chaim is recognized as a chassid, as that devoutly, scrupulously pious person, which he was. Fact, now Torah knowledge is fact. And because that's hardcore fact, he knew what he was. That he prayed, I should not be recognized for that. The tzaddik decrees, God follows the decree of the tzaddik. Therefore, he's not recognized for that, although he was that. But the other area, piety is something else. And because the tzaddik always feels he falls short of where he should be at, that's not something he would ask for, because he feels he's not that. Therefore, he's recognized as that. So Chofetz Chaim was bothered. It was a known fact. If you read about Reb Chaim Brisker, Reb Chaim Soloveitchik, who was the chief rabbi of Brisk, he was world renowned. As much as he's world renowned for his analysis of learning Torah, and it's utilized in every Torah yeshiva in the world. The analytical approach, how to understand something and how to classify things, depth and breadth of Torah. But people who knew them in Europe, what he was, his acts of loving kindness surpassed his Torah knowledge, surpassed it. It paled compared to his chesed. So Chofetz Chaim once said, he says, I can't envy the Chofetz Chaim, the Reb Chaim Brisker's genius. He had a genius one of a kind. He wasn't endowed with a level of genius. But we as Jews at Sinai, we were all endowed with Avas Chesed, with loving kindness. So if we're all endowed with loving kindness, why does the Chofetz Chaim feel, why do I fall short of doing acts of chesed? Why aren't I as selfless to chesed as Rav Chaim Brisker's selfless to chesed? And he always reprimanded himself. I'm not enough. I should be doing more. Because if we were all there simultaneously and we were all endowed, understanding what God's chesed is, and that's what touched us, so why am I less than Rav Chaim Soloveitchik? There's a story, in Europe, printed books were very expensive, Svarim. And the Chofetz Chaim, being the chief rabbi of Brisk, had a library. And every day, there was a member of the Brisk community who would come borrow a book. It was like a lending library. Except this person, when he took the book, he never returned it. And every day he would come for another book, and he never returned it. Next day, another book. Eventually, there were maybe 3 books left in the bookcase. So Chaim Brisker says to him, he says, you must have all my books in your house. You might as well take the bookcase. You'll have a place to put the books. Not with a claim against him, being upset. I mean, that was the selfless level of doing for another person, not ever feeling the pinch that you're taking advantage of me. That was the extent of Rav Chaim Brisker's chesed. There's a famous story that there was a person who came before Pesach to ask a halachic question of Rav Chaim Soloveitchik. Can you fulfill your obligation of the 4 cups at the Seder with milk? That's the question he asked. Reb Chaim Soloveitchik was the chief rabbi of Brisk. And his wife was present when this person asked the question. He immediately takes out a wad of bills and he gives the person enough money to cover all his needs for Pesach. So his wife says to him, I don't understand. The man asked you a question about, could you use milk for the 4 cups at the Seder? Why are you giving the man a wad of bills? So you don't understand. If he's asking me, could you use milk for the 4 cups? Evidently, as he doesn't have wine, he has no provisions for Pesach. That's the reason why I gave him the wad of bills to cover all his needs for Pesach. You understand? I mean, you have a problem. I understand you have, but to give a wad of bills? The answer is, when it comes to help another person, it's like overwhelming. It's no less than you needing to be helped yourself. That's Avas Chesed. You do Chesed with love. You love Chesed. It's not something I have to make a decision whether I will, I don't. If I'm in need, I'm there to help. That was the Reb Chaim Brisker, that was the Chofetz Chaim, and that's what all these people were. I told the story of Moshe Feinstein, Zechat Tzaddik Livrocha, also. As they were great in Torah, they were great in human relations, how they did it. Moshe Feinstein was walking, this is in the 60s, and he was already an older person in the 60s. He passed away at the age of 95 in the 80s. And every year before Pesach, he would give a poor Jew an envelope with $300 cash to cover his Pesach needs. And he's walking down the street on Lower East Side, and a younger person is accompanying him. And he stops and he says, I have to stop off here. There's somebody living on the 5th floor of this tenement. There was no elevator. I'm going to walk the 5 flights of steps to give him this envelope with $300 cash. That this person is able to have the means to purchase whatever he needs for Pesach. So the person was a young person, maybe in his early 30s. He says, the great Rosh Shiva, you have to walk 5 flights of steps. It's not easy for you. It'll take me a moment. I'll run up and down. I will continue walking. So Moshe Feinstein says, you don't understand. When I bring him that envelope and I walk 5 flights of steps, do you know what it means to this man? I went out of my way. I inconvenienced myself to help him for Pesach. I made his Pesach not only financially, I put him on a pedestal that I value him, I've given him life. You delivering the money, now he has the means to purchase the food. Rabbi Feinstein sent it. But Rabbi Feinstein himself going and climbing the steps to be able to see him and acknowledge him, wish him a good Yom Tif, it's a whole different reality. It's a whole different understanding. You have to have Avas Chesed even to come upon these understandings of how to do chesed. You know, Rav Shach, Zecher Tzaddik Livrocha, was the Rishiva Ponovich. He passed away at the age of 107. He was still saying public lectures at the age of 104. He was still functional. And there's a story, and he had the whole world on his shoulders. The yeshiva he had about 1,000 students, and he would say public lectures, but there's nothing that he wasn't in touch with throughout Israel. And there was a young man, he became engaged. Rav Shach then maybe was about 90 years old. And the family of the fiance lived in Tel Aviv. Bnei Brak to Tel Aviv is about a 20-minute car ride. And the first Shabbos of their engagement, the chosan was invited to the home of his fiancée for Shabbos. And he's there Friday, that beautiful meal. It comes Shabbos day, he goes to shul with his future father-in-law, and somebody makes a comment, and the murmurings among the group, look what kind of son-in-law this guy picks. It's not the best of the pick. And people are talking about this son-in-law he picked that maybe was a mistake. And it's not something they would take such a son-in-law. And hearing enough of these murmurings, it put a damper on his feelings toward this future son-in-law, to the point that he shared with his daughter, the future bride, fiance, that maybe we should terminate the relationship. This young man felt that it was over. He was engaged for a day. The engagement's about to be terminated because he hears the way people are speaking about him. And even it's touched his future bride in a certain negative way. It looks like it's just a question of time. The time Shabbos is over, Sunday morning, he's no longer engaged. And he's in the doldrums. Somehow word gets back to Rav Shach that this is what happened over Shabbos. In Tel Aviv, he's in Bnei Brak. Rav Shach immediately says this to a younger student of his, we're taking a cab to Tel Aviv. And these people, they lived on the third floor. And it was about 11:30 at night, Saturday night, what we call Motzoi Shabbos. And Rav Shach walks up 3 flights. The man's in his 90s. And he knocks on the door of this future father-in-law. And the man opens the door, and who does he see? He sees Rav Shach, world-renowned Rosh Hashiva, leading Torah sage of the world. So the person, the future father-in-law says to Rav Shach, why do I deserve the honor of having the Rosh Hashiva come to visit me Motzoi Shabbos? He says, do you know why he came? To tell you what kind of special son-in-law you chose. That he's one of a kind, and you're the luckiest man in the world that you chose this person to be your future son-in-law. He says, that's what I came to tell you, to inform you that. He says, he wished him a good vach, turned around, went right back. You understand? The man's in his 90s. The whole world is on his shoulders. When he hears there's a need and he's able to correct it, and this young man was victimized and slandered and hurt and literally, and the relationship could be terminated, nothing's too difficult. He goes and he devises a means how to put this young man on a pedestal, that the man now is beaming and he feels more fortunate than all these people combined that he chose such a son-in-law. You understand what Avos Chesed is? The greater the Torah sage, the more intense is the love to do chesed to another person. The endless examples of people of this caliber of Torah, not only did they have Torah Chaim, the Torah which gives them the connection to eternity, they also have the Avos Chesed. It really goes hand in hand. We will continue tomorrow discussing this. There's plenty more to talk about in this bracha, and I think it's important to continue. We're just going to stop now for a few